What do you do when you think you're doing everything right, but morale is going down? When there's growth, but it's not sustainable? What happens when the very thing that's gotten you to where you are as a leader is no longer what is needed? Do you double down on your technical expertise, or are you open to the work of becoming what you're not? Today's guest, Todd Bolsinger, tells us the story of how he did the latter. I first got to know Todd at Fuller Seminary, where he teaches in the D-Min program and oversees the Church Leadership Institute. With over 30 years of leadership experience, Todd holds an MDiv and a PhD, has written 9 books, speaks all over the world, and is an in-demand leadership consultant and executive coach through his company, A.E. Sloan. He's worked with organizations like Baylor University, World Vision, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, Young Life, the Salvation Army, and over 100 churches of different sizes, denominations, and locations. For me, Todd is one of the voices I trust most on leadership, and Lisa and I are excited for you to hear a bit of his story today. Todd Bolsinger, it is so good to have you with us today.
I'm glad to be with both of you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so fun, Todd, to have you here. As you know, the title of our podcast, the podcast that Dupree has launched, is The Hidden Work of Leaders, and this is not new subject matter to you. You are broadly experienced, have written about some of the same themes and topics that we write about in our book, Life in Flux. And while we didn't write Life in Flux specifically for leaders, a lot of leaders are being drawn to the work. And you are a leader. You're a leader of leaders. You work with pastors and churches and all kinds of different stakeholder groups. What is your unique contribution to the leadership space? What makes Todd when you show up in a room? What do you bring that is sort of uniquely how you like to show up in a whole integrated way?
Yeah, those are 2 questions. How do I show up, and how do I like to show up?
Well, there you go.
There's sometimes a gap between those.
For sure.
How I like to show up is, I would say, with a combination of both energy and curiosity. I'm usually really, really enthusiastic to be there. Especially this stage of my life, I say the great joy of my life is I'm never in a meeting I don't want to be in anymore. It's like the thing that most people are most jealous of, because most of us are always in meetings. That somebody else has an agenda for our lives. I rarely am, so I'm usually very enthusiastic. And what I find is, if I show up both with enthusiasm and curiosity, I come out of that meeting more energized than before, because I learned something and it's great.
Yeah.
At my worst, I just show up with enthusiasm. Like I want to share what I know, and I want to be impressive. And
interesting.
And then usually I come out of that meeting feeling like, well, that's probably an hour and a half. Nobody's going to get back. So so it's some combination of that is at my best. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's helpful. I mean, even just the letting us in on how your own self-reflection works there, how your mind works. I think that's a good lead into the next question, which is really kind of the heart of what we want to get after. So, as you know, Lisa and I wrote a book. It's called Life in Flux. It's all about really the inner work you do in seasons of transition. As we started talking, one of the things that we agreed upon was, why don't you come be a co-host with me on Dupree Center's first season of The Hidden Work of Leadership? And this idea of the hidden work of leadership really comes out of one of our data points in a research project that Meryl and I did. And the data point was that we just interviewed such interesting people. Their resumes were really impressive, and they were really good humans. And, those 2 things don't always go together. And one of the things we asked people was how did you become this way? And over and over and over again, we heard stories of people having to lean in when things got very tough, particularly in seasons of crisis, challenge, or even crucible. And the more and more I thought about this, I'm like, wait a minute, that kind of work is not the kind of work that is on full display. It's not the kind of work that, gets put in the limelight. It usually happens with a trusted few or in sidebar conversations. It's a lot of what Lisa and I were going after when we wrote our book. But this podcast whole point is to give a little bit of space to that often behind the scenes work. So we want to know about a time when you had to do that kind of hidden work, particularly if, life felt like it was kind of in a transition point, some kind of disruption, a flux season. But really talk to us about a time when you had to do this kind of hidden work.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this actually ever since I read your guys' book. That the time that was most in flux for me was odd because for me, almost every time my life has gone in flux, it's been a surprise. Like I had an agenda. I'm a pretty strategic person. I actually have a plan and I work that plan. And then I get disrupted by something. And what I got disrupted by was I was pastoring a church and we were growing. We were doing, everything was going in the right direction. Like I said, all the metrics were going up and to the right. Not skyrocketing. Nobody would pay attention, just solid, good, healthy church. And that was a joy, but the morale was going down. And I couldn't figure it out. Like I was total, like if all the metrics are going up, the money's going up, people are going up, new people are coming, new people are being baptized. All the metrics are going up. Why are my best people, their morale going down? Why was I was like losing my best leaders. They were like checking out and stuff. And I just didn't know what to make of that. And so it actually so disrupted me that I actually took money that I had in an account. Like the church had set aside some money from a book I'd written that I'd sold, and I gave the money to the church, and they set it aside. And I said, I want to pay for someone to come in and look at us and look at me and figure that part out. And it's literally started me on the trajectory of leadership formation that I've been on ever since. So I had no idea that the disruption of not knowing what I was doing at that moment would lead me to become a person who spends all my time talking with leaders about how to lead when you don't know what you're doing, which is what adaptive leadership is all about. It's when the best practices don't work anymore. How do you lead? So it was that time.
So that makes me curious. If you're willing to share at some level, what were some of the things that work revealed to you about what wasn't working?
Yeah. Well, the most embarrassing part of it all was the reason why the morale was going down is that the consultant who worked with us said, hey, we looked at your church. We have all these metrics that we did this assessment, and your church scored higher than any other church we've ever worked with. He literally said, I would raise my daughters in your church. But everybody talked about you. All they ever did was talk about you. Partly because I came in a time of crisis and we had turned things around. And he said, so I don't know that you did this, but you built this church around you. And I realized I had unconsciously built what I call Todd Bolsinger Ministries at San Clemente Presbyterian Church. And when he said this to me, I wanted to throw up. I was like, I didn't mean to do that. But I had come out of a church where the pastor really had built, he had his own ministries, and he was well known. I had unconsciously picked up that I was the center of the work, which meant that good leaders said, I'd like to be part of something bigger than your ministry, quite frankly. I want to do something that God wants me to do, and I want to do. So thank you. I'll gladly contribute to you, but that's not what I want to do. And so that's why the best people were checking out, and I had to literally learn to lead all over again. In a way that I had never confronted before.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's really, thank you for sharing that. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. These are like the stories that it's like, Todd, I look at you and I'm like, gosh, I just have so much respect for the way you lead and move through the world, for your own self-awareness as you show up in a room, whether it's the way you want to or not. And what we're finding over and over is that these kind of stories are underneath all that we respect today. So one of the things I'm curious about is actually what you had to undo and kind of redo. Can you unpack that for us a bit?
Well, it was the first time that I learned about what Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky calls adaptive leadership. So adaptive leadership is where you can't lead anymore as an expert. So what had basically been is I had been able to take the church as far as I could with my own expertise. We did well. I was glad. I was trained well. I'm a pretty competent person. But for what we were facing, we actually had to face something bigger than my own expertise. And what I was doing unconsciously was just doubling down on my expertise, which meant I was, preaching with more enthusiasm, leading with more, direction, being a bit more, demanding. Like I was just and I didn't realize that what I needed to actually do is learn a different way of leading. And adaptive leadership is really when you don't know what you're doing and you have to learn to lead through learning, which is about curiosity, and letting go, which is about grief and empathy, and navigating competing values, which requires discernment and clarity. Like there were all these things that I never thought of as being part of the leadership toolbox. I mean, I'd gotten a PhD in spiritual formation, so it was in my spiritual formation toolbox, but it hadn't been in my leadership.
Oh, interesting.
And so it was the first time that it all kind of came together for me that I needed to literally learn to lead all over again. And that was not only the most disruptive, but it literally led to I would say the second half of my life has been moving in that direction because of that.
Yeah, I was thinking you just used the language of letting go, which is the chapter title of one of our chapters in the book. And we have these contrasts throughout the book, the common practice and uncommon practice. And you just, like, if we could put your picture next to this one, it would fit based on what you just said, which is the common posture is I keep white knuckling even after I sense that my way is not working, right? So you double down on what you know how to do. And the uncommon posture is I let go. Right. Trusting God and embracing whatever comes next, which moves right into the chapter that follows called Embrace the Unfigureoutable. And that is the space where adaptive leadership has to show up. What shifted in the morale of the church over time as you started to make these changes yourself? And what did you notice part of what you're talking about here is what many people call culture. It's the white space that's in between the measurements and the strategies and the tactics that's a little more intangible. So how did the culture shift? I'm super curious.
Well, this was the most interesting thing. I have this revelation, this aha. Oh, I have to learn to lead all over again. So this will be great. And I'm going to learn this new way. And I invite my leaders into it and I'm talking about it. And the morale went down even further. Because part of what happens is who was left in our church were all the people who liked me being a directive leader. Like they literally, and they had the theology of that. Like, we believe God speaks to you and you're God's man for us. And so I literally had one of the most important persons in my life, like one of the most important mentors in my life, literally made an appointment to come in and talk to me to say, you used to be such a leader and you felt like you've lost the fire in the belly. I wonder if it's just time for you to move on. It was so discouraging because I hadn't lost any fire in the belly. I was just trying to figure out this different way of leading. And it was hard for people. I mean, you talk about disappointing people at a rate they can absorb. I had disappointed people unconsciously. Now I was consciously disappointing them because I was trying a new direction. So it was, for me, a massive step of my own faith and development. And I had 3 years. I had a professional coach helping me through it. And, 5 years of spiritual direction to figure out the next part of my life. I mean, it was a massive retooling of my life because it actually got worse before it got better.
Yeah, it's often the case, right? When you start to let go of things and the new isn't there yet to replace it, that's the messy middle. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Todd, as you describe that, and it's fun because I actually I haven't heard this story before, so this is very curious to me. I hear a couple of things. I don't, maybe even the mentor conversation, but maybe that aside, I hear a certain amount of safety for you to be able to do this work in the context of this church and the context of this organization, which feels unusual to me. And then I also am just so curious about how, as a decisive, directive, energetic, clear leader, like on the kind of micro discipline level of how you undid that? Like, is it week by week? Is it in staff meeting? Did you, hey, I don't know what's happening. Okay, hey, we're going to be fine, even though inside I don't know that we're going to be fine. So I'm curious about the work itself on a micro level, and then the larger context of safety that you felt in order to be able to go on this journey.
Well, I don't think I've thought about this till this minute, because that's a really good question. But I think I would say this way. One thing I had going for me was I did have a PhD, and I did know to trust
Sure.
research. And I know here was a set of research from a couple of guys right at Harvard who were like saying, this is a model of ministry that you may not have heard of in the church, but it actually is been remarkably effective in lots of other places, way bigger than my little church in a beach town, right? So I trusted the research and I leaned into it, because that's one of the things I had learned about my own in my own work. So that helped me. The second part is I'm an Enneagram 8. So for me, like the fact that there's a challenge here almost made me like get tougher about the whole thing. Like I was just going to take this sucker on. I would joke that I don't have to kick down every door, just the ones that are closed, like I kicked the door before I tried the doorknob. And so that was a time when I was absolutely doing that. So those two things were really clear. What I did is I had a staff meeting, and I said to my staff, we are going to, like, it's my executive staff, it was a small group of us. I said, we're going to change this meeting. We're going to be behind closed doors like we always have been. Everybody thinks we're in here making decisions. We're not going to make decisions. We're actually going to instead learn together how to lead this time. And now when I work with groups, I call that, getting up on the balcony and doing balcony work. And that's what we were doing. But at the time, we literally joked that everybody thought we were in there making a bunch of decisions. The people who were demoralized used to say to us, everything in this church is controlled by Todd and his Sanhedrin. So it's always a bad deal when you refer to that. But what we were is we really were deciding we're not going to make any decisions. We're going to just say yes to everything. We're going to create a mess, and we're going to learn from it. So I created a group of people to learn with me. And while the rest of the church might have been floundering a little bit, the two things I had was I had the technical competence of being able to preach pretty well every Sunday, and I had a staff team that was up for the learning. So I had those two things.
That's awesome. So I knew I liked you, but now I like you even more as a fellow Enneagram 8. And one of the things we talk about in the book, we talk very lightly about the Enneagram through the lens of orientation to time, which is not the most common lens that people step into Enneagram work around, but they're future-oriented types, past-oriented types, and present-oriented types. And the 8, fellow 8 buddy we are future-oriented, which means that often we miss what's happening right in front of us, right?
Yeah.
And then the notion that you were surprised by some of these disruptions fits with the future orientation, because you're moving fast and you're moving forward. And the shift for the 8 who wants to be controlled, doesn't want to be controlled, so will control, right? That's an 8's response to change most of the time. But the shift is to this space of vulnerability, which you've described. And you also mentioned you had a coach and a spiritual director through this season, which we need those guides with us. How was it? I mean, what were the shifts going on inside of you as you moved to this space of vulnerability? Was it scary? Was it? I mean, Michaela could use the word safety, but I know how that feels inside. I can go right there in my body, right? And so it can, even if they're people you trust, it still can feel very unsafe and scary a little bit as you're stepping into that space.
Yeah. See, this is actually one of my weaknesses, is because I don't feel very scared in places like that. Like, this is where I miss other people.
Okay.
I actually get really energized. I'm like, oh, game on.
Yeah.
So part of my issue is I'm an 8 wing 7. So, which means, like, my favorite quote is from E.B. White, who says, every day I wake up in the morning and I want to change the world, or I want to have one hell of a good time. It makes it very hard to plan my day. and so literally for me, that's like the challenge of my life is, which one am I doing today? And so
that's great.
right? And so for me, I often miss, even with my clients today and with people I work with, that other people feel a level of insecurity or fear or lack of safety
Mm,
when I actually feel adrenaline. And
Yeah.
so I've had to
interesting.
learn to attune to that. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's actually a weakness. I mean, I'm not saying this like I'm so big and strong. It's like, no, I have a part of my being
Mhm.
that is just deformed, that is just not as developed, and that I've had to work on developing.
Yeah, you and I actually are similar in this way, Todd, because not only do I get energized and have adrenaline, I think it's fun because I'm the Enneagram 7. So I'm
Yeah,
like, this is fun. Like this
yeah,
hard work that everybody, and then uh, learning actively to be attuned to just like how that impacts the system and others. And
yeah,
oh my goodness, other people feel a lot of different things in these moments than I feel. So just even, the encouragement that you're still aware of that blind spot, even if it's hard to get to, that's helpful. You've mentioned a couple times, and I want you to unpack for us a little bit more how you take this feels like an example, not that this is your only source of motivation for why you do the work you do today, but it feels instructive, it feels
yeah.
foundational. And so I'm curious, how, just for you to give us a bit of a picture in terms of how you work with leaders today, how you work with church leaders today, organizational leaders, to help them do the very kind of work that you just described.
Yeah. So a lot of what we do is, so the way I think of it this way is, if you technical competence, which is our expertise, builds trust. So usually I build trust because I've written books that people have read and they've liked. I walk in the room, I can deliver good teaching and good content, and good training. I'm a pretty good coach, and I have a good team. Like I built a team you can trust really quickly. So what I've done is I look at it. We use all that trust so we can get to the moment where the adaptive moment requires us to go to the vulnerable place of transformation. So for me, it's about how trust translates over into transformation. And the most interesting moment is when all of a sudden, we have all this scaffolding that gets us really high up there, but now we have to lean out and actually go. So the most exciting thing in the room for me is when things go off script, when I don't
Mm.
know what's happening, when all of a sudden we're learning something totally new. My students actually tease me that like, honestly, I get this look in my eye like, oh, this is going to get messy. This is kind of fun. And
Mm.
that for me is built on the fact that it's not just that it's not that I'm just an adrenaline junkie. It's that I actually trust the scaffolding, the format, the research, the experience. So now we can actually get out there. Like when I was a kid, I did rock climbing, and the whole reason why you have a rope is not to climb the rope; it's to climb the rock. So if you're going to go do an overhang or something, it's going to keep you from dying. So you have to trust your equipment. But what you have to do is still get out there and do it. And that's kind of the way our company works. I mean, we have all these tools that are really to help people get to the place where we can address the underlying issues that they've not been able to address before.
Yeah.
Mm.
It sparks a thought for me. I do similar work with teams and organizations, and I I too like to create that container of trust, right? We've built the relationships, and my favorite moment in the room is when someone throws up their hands in either anger or frustration and says, "We don't know what to do." I'm like, "Great. Now the work can begin," right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they've let go of all of their preconceived strategies and all of the things. So what happens in the room at that moment as people begin to realize that what got them there isn't going to get them where they want to go? How do you help them navigate through that space? Because that's really the crucible moment, right? Whether it's
Yeah,
for a team
yeah,
or a person.
yeah. Well, Lisa, as you know, when a person finally can throw up their hands and say that, you've probably known that they were there 30 minutes, 40 minutes,
Sure.
4 hours, 6 months before that, right?
Right.
What,
You've been
so what,
waiting. Yeah.
so yeah. So what I've been looking for is I try to look for the signs early. Like I try to look, and when I see the signs early, like people getting angry or people trying to go to quick fixes or like all the signs of stuff that says
Mm,
we're getting anxious, so we want to solve it. For me, that's the sign, okay, we're getting somewhere. like the energy,
Yeah.
like, so I just pay attention to the energy in the room. And so when I get excited is the moments, even I've learned to become excited before they get to that place, because it means that we're hitting gold. Like here's the sign. It's like, here's the symbol. Here's the thing that I know is in the air that's going to be there. And so for me, then it gives me the confidence to say, okay, let's keep going. Let's take it deeper.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's,
Todd, I'm curious. So I feel like there could very well could be the person listening right now that's like, okay, I feel like I'm a team leader, I'm an organizational leader, maybe I'm a church leader, I'm a nonprofit leader, I'm a business leader. Wait a minute, I recognize some of what Todd's talking about. I feel some of the anxiety, I feel some of the unknown. I'm not quite sure what to do. What exactly is he talking about, and what exactly do I need to do next? Just because that's, right, if we're starting to see ourselves or hear
Yep.
ourselves. So I actually want you to back up a step. I want you to tell us, just in like the plainest, simplest, talk to me like I'm five language,
Mm-hmm.
what the difference in a technical and adaptive change is,
Mm-hmm.
why you see so much adaptive change playing out in organizations in the church, and how leaders, if they're starting to hear themselves in some of what you're describing, can like take a step on that road.
Yeah. So the way to think about it is technical challenges are challenges that are complicated, hard, difficult, but they are problems for which you have expertise. Right? So I say my dad had a heart valve transplant during COVID. Like my dad who never goes to the doctor, COVID saved his life, because if he'd have been out doing what he usually does, he's a stubborn dude from Alaska who's 88, 82 years old, and he works every day. He would have been out working. He would have fallen over dead.
Mm,
Because he was sheltered in place, my stepmom noticed he wasn't breathing and so got him to a doctor.
mm,
The doctor who did a heart valve transplant is doing a technical fix, right? That's an expert
mm-hmm,
solving it, right?
mm-hmm,
So we are all, almost every single one of us who are a leader, have certain things we do. So when I talk to people in my little practicing change books, I always ask, what is your superpower? What's the thing you do that you're so good at, that probably made you a leader? That's your technical competence, right? Your adaptive leadership is where you have to lead when you can't use your best practice. You can't use your
mm,
superpower, right?
mm,
You can't, like so for me, my big superpower is I'm a good talker. Like
mm,
I'm good at talking. So when the sermons don't work anymore, when I can't talk my way out of it, when I can't come up with the perfect statement to make it change, or what do I have to do next? And it's that I don't know what to do next, and I'm going to still keep leading, that makes it adaptive. How do I
mm,
discern what I'm going to do next? It's still mine to do, and I don't know what to do. So there's a set of tools that we teach people to do at that moment. It's not just flounder around, but there's a set of tools. So you learn a different way of leading, and that's the deeper challenge. And I would
mm.
say, so for most leaders, the first thing to pay attention to is, when you get anxious, do you double down on the stuff you've always done?
Yeah,
Do you paddle harder in a canoe that's in a river that has no water?
yeah,
So you're
yeah,
burning out your rotator cuff and you're exhausting yourself and not going anywhere, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, just the like little seed piece in there. I've heard you say in other places, so I want to tee you up to do this here, that this kind of adaptive challenge, the adaptive change is necessary, is widespread in the
Yeah.
church today and in the world today. So why do you like, what are you noticing? Why do you think that is?
Well, for one thing, I think it's I think we were in a season where the most important thing for leaders was to be trustworthy.
Mm,
So as long as you're people of character, we all agree that you have character and you have competence, then you'll grow your organization, you'll grow your school. You're like everything was in the growth mode.
mm-hmm,
Today we realize we are living in a world where the leader with the most character doesn't necessarily win the election, right? 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 We live in a world where people's pain points, some of us have not even been able to understand, right?
mm,
I heard somebody say today, that sometimes we look for the wrong answer to the right question, and most
mm,
of us are missing the question.
mm,
So what the reason why the church today is, for years, the big challenge was we were in a Christendom world where almost everything Christian was at the center of our culture, and now we're not. Now we're not. We're just in a
Hmm.
much more pluralistic world, and you can't assume things of the past, and so you're going to have to figure out new ways of leading forward. I said that the world in front of us is nothing like the world behind us, and we were all shaped for the world behind us.
Hmm.
I mean, I see it everywhere. And so I want to ask another question related to how you have learned to show up personally, because I think this is, for all of us, this is where the work is, regardless of your orientation to time. We started with learning that you show up with enthusiasm and curiosity. How do you keep yourself very present in the moment, very practically? What are some things that you do and that you help others learn to do that allow you to stay very present in the moment when your future orientation wants to get you pushing the train a little faster? Because I think this is the practice, right? This practice of pausing and learning to be present is where a lot of the work starts and has to be grounded from.
Yeah, it's true. It's so true. My problem is, as soon as I think I know something, I want to go there. I always want to go
Right.
there. And what I have to tell myself, I literally have this little mantra I say, which is, I know what I think. I think I know what they think. I really should learn to come to know what they actually think.
Right.
Hmm.
It makes me I stay present by getting curious. Curiosity makes me present. So what is it
Interesting.
about this? What's the question I can ask? What's the thing that I need to discover? What's the thing I'm
Hmm.
not seeing?
Yeah.
Um, and that really, my challenge in my life is that I've always been a relatively intelligent person, and I was in leadership at a young age.
Yeah.
So I was just used to people listening to me. So I developed
Yeah.
my speaking skills long before I developed my listening and my question skills. Like, learning
Yeah.
to ask better questions is at the center of the work I do now.
Hmm.
That's great.
Todd, you have, okay, so you're many things: pastor, friend, professor, leader, author. You've written this really cool, new, very accessible series that you're calling, it's Practicing Change series.
Right.
My favorite one is Invest in Transformation, Quit Relying on Trust. I got a chance to read all 4 books before they were published. And I was like, started out and I was like, oh, I'm like reading them because they're Todd's and I like Todd and I want to like be a good friend of Todd. And then like that one, I was like, oh, I need like a minute with this one. Like I just like need a minute with it. So you're this person, you are trustworthy, right? Like that is something that you have established. I am curious what this trustworthy, very competent, all the things, sits with people, helps them go off the map leader would say to his younger self. So looking back 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, you pick a time. What would you say to younger Todd about doing this often hidden, harder work of leadership that has made you who you are today?
Yeah. So what I'd say is, it's going to take a lot longer than you think. It's harder than you think, and it's better than you think.
Mm,
Like, I've been married to Beth for 35 years. We met as teenagers, literally.
mm,
Um, if you'd have told me as a teenager what we would go through to get to 35 years of marriage, I would have said, I don't know. If you
mm,
looking back now, there's not even a question that it was worth it. So
mm,
the hard part is when you're in it, like literally, I was at the trust and transformation part. The hardest part about that is there's no transformation without trust. I mean, to me, leadership is about transformation. That's what makes it leadership, right? Leadership requires us to become what we're not. That's the difference with management. It's like it requires us to change, right? Transformation requires trust. But those of us who feel like we're so trustworthy, that should be enough, that's really disappointing when it's not enough. You
yeah.
actually have to invest that trust in transformation, and that's what's really hard. And that's what I think many times as a younger leader, I just thought, as long as I get good grades, play by the rules, don't make big mistakes, make the numbers go up and to the right, it'll be fine, right?
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden you realize it's not fine. It actually required me to lay a lot of stuff down, question a lot of things, question a lot of things about myself, and kind of go through a process of my own letting go so that I could become a different kind of leader.
Todd, thanks for telling us your story of letting go. Thanks for giving us a window into the learnings that you're still open to. I'm definitely walking away with thinking, wow, like I kind of forgot how curious Todd is. And so just really appreciate you modeling that here today. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hidden Work of Leadership. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it insightful. The Hidden Work of Leadership is brought to you by the Max Dupree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary, where we envision a world in which leaders across industries and seasons of life are deeply formed as the people of God so that they might seek the very best for the people and systems entrusted to their care. Our episodes are produced by Justin Heap, who ensures our engineering and editing is engaging and sounds just right. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. You can also follow the Dupree Center on LinkedIn and Instagram for updates and behind-the-scenes content. For more information about today's episode and access to additional resources, visit our website at dupree.org. That's DEPREE.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Hidden Work of Leadership.